Hi, my name is Dr. Peggy Kerr, and I welcome you to view my poster, Increasing Equity and Access in Online Discussions Through Universal Design for Learning. In order to take the information I share and make it applicable to your own work, I encourage you to access the QR code to open a worksheet where you can capture your ideas as we go through the topics. The first thing I'd like to discuss is what is Universal Design for Learning? The goal behind it is focused on learner agency that's both purposeful and reflective, resourceful and authentic, as well as strategic and action-oriented. The UDL guidelines are designed to address critical barriers rooted in biases and systems of exclusion for learners with or without disabilities. The latest iteration of the guidelines addresses inclusion of learners with cultural differences. Let's next look at the three principles of Universal Design for Learning. The first one is engagement. This relates to the why of learning. What is it about the learning that makes students want to do it? If they're not interested in learning, it makes it really challenging for them to engage with that learning. The second principle is representation. This refers to the what of learning. When you think about it in the context of teaching, it's what the teacher does when they're teaching a class, and the instructional materials they use to help students learn. The final principle relates to action and expression. This is the how of learning. What that means is the different ways that students are able to show that they understand or can perform skills that they learned. One of the ways that I like to utilize Universal Design for Learning in my discussion posts relates to content choices. One example of choice that I give students in my discussions is to ask them to share an example from their own experiences. Another example would be to research a type of topic that interests them. That enables them to both take their interest but also bring in research they find related to it. A third option would be to find a relevant article, a blog post, a video, or a website that brings new information to the discussion. Another strategy I really like to include at the end of my discussion prompt is to ask my students to pose a question about their topic for their peers to answer. This enables them to encourage their peers to consider the topic of interest to them, and it might stir interest in their peers as well. When you think about choices in discussion in replies, there are a number of different strategies you can use. One is to respond from your own experience. Another is to bring in additional resources. A third would be to answer the questions that your peers posed. I find this strategy to be particularly effective when students have difficulty providing peer feedback. If they're able to answer a question, it makes it much easier for them to think of a response in relation to their peer's original post. Another thing I encourage students to do is ask a question about the post. When you look at content choices in UDL, the biggest impact that they have related to those three areas is on engagement, because students are able to choose how they decide to approach that particular topic in the discussion. But if you think about it, there's also some opportunities for different types of representation. If students choose to use a video or an audio or an image as part of their submission, that brings in different forms of content into the discussion. And as students reply to each other, if they choose to use different forms of expression, video, audio, images, as opposed to just written, that brings in different action and expression content. Another way you can look at choices in discussion relate to format. So the typical response in a discussion is written, but it doesn't have to be only written. Students could use a visual, like a PowerPoint or Google Slides or a concept map or even a Padlet. In my classes, when students choose PowerPoints, I am really struck by how organized and to the point their information is. In my mind, it seems like a lot of work to make a PowerPoint, but my students who do it really love it, and their learning really shines because of that organization around that tool. An oral recording could be another option for a choice, similar to what a podcast would be. If my students choose an oral recording, I also require that they include a transcript for accessibility. And then finally, another option could be a video recording. So it includes both the visual and the oral, and I also require a transcript for accessibility. One additional choice in discussion that I give my students the option for is synchronous. I teach all of my online classes in an asynchronous environment, but I find that students enjoy having the opportunity to come together at the same time when given that option. So what I do is I survey my students to determine the best times and dates for us to meet, recognizing that I'm never going to be able to catch everybody. I have students from around the world, different time zones, family responsibilities, and jobs that make it impossible for us all to come together. But I make it optional. I record the session and I post it to the discussion so students who aren't in attendance can review it later. Even though they can't engage live, they can still engage with the content that was covered live. I also award my synchronous participants credit for the post and any replies that they make in that session for their online work. So that makes the work a little bit easier for them to just do it in the moment instead of having to go back into the discussion and write. When you think about the choices in format related to UDL, it is definitely engaging to be able to have students pick the format that works best for them. It also allows them to express their learning in different ways. And finally, as students are expressing their learning in different ways, other students can learn from it. I hope you found these options helpful when you consider how you do your discussions and ways that you can integrate Universal Design for Learning into them. I welcome you to contact me at my email address if you have any questions or comments. The reference that I used for the Universal Design for Learning guidelines is referenced here. I do want to offer one additional source. It's called Teaching for Inclusion, Universal Design for Learning, that covers not only discussions, but other ways that you can integrate online, strategies of Universal Design for Learning into your teaching. Thank you so much for your time.